Hello and welcome back to the Maple Leafs Lounge. This week's show is brought to you by Morning Skates, a daily newsletter delivered to your inbox Monday to Friday, jam-packed with the best hockey stuff on the planet. It's a daily dose of the latest NHL news, rumors, history, funnies, quizzes, etc. Just a little hockey fun and information brought to you every day of the week from the hockey writers. You will see a link in the show description below. I'm your host, Alex Hobson, and if you're a regular watcher of this program, I am not normally the one doing the hosting, but my co-host here, Peter Baracchini, has something much more interesting to talk about than I do. So, Peter, I guess we'll stop beating around the bush here. You were at the Draft Combine in Buffalo yesterday, and I understand you've got a couple of articles coming out in the future on it, some player profiles and more. So let's just start off with that, Peter. Initial thoughts and reactions from the Draft Combine yesterday.
Yeah, it was honestly, it was very exhilarating to be there and attend the event. I was there with, fellow hockey writers, writer, to repeat there, Mark Shag, who is also our credentials guy. And he was there covering the event as well. So to meet him and meet someone else from the THW team in person was absolutely great. The overall combine itself, it was fantastic. I mean, you hear stories about, the VO2 max and the wind gate and everything like that. And to see it up close and personal, hearing the people yell in the player's face to tell them to go, go, go. It was that, like, you see it on TV, but to be there in person was just incredible. And to, get to know the players a little bit more, the draft interview process, what that was like, engaging them a little bit more on a personal note as well. How their personality is like, it was great. It was great to be there, interact with them, the media itself. Fantastic opportunity, and to cover that for the hockey writers, it was an absolute privilege.
Well, if you guys were following Peter on Twitter, which you can do so at P Baracchini on Twitter, then you'd know all the amazing coverage that Peter was bringing us. There's one tweet in particular, Peter, that stuck out to me, and I want to talk about this with you right off the bat. So I understand that you talked to a number of prospects yesterday, and you uncovered, I guess, some of the players that the Maple Leafs met with. And of course, for people who don't know, they're going to be picking 25th overall this year if they don't trade up or trade down. But Peter, Rutger McGroarty, first of all, one of the best names in the entire draft class, I think. It just screams a guy who's willing to get dirty and go into the corners, which obviously, Leafs fans would love to have. Peter, talk a little bit about Rutger McGroarty and what you took away from your interview with him.
Yeah, I mean, a phenomenal story. I mean, coming all the way from Nebraska, I mean, there are only 3 players who have played in the NHL, and one currently is Neil Pionk. And, for Rutger McGroarty to come from a state that's very little known in terms of the hockey universe, and to put another, top name from that state is absolutely great. And, you saw a glimpse of him throughout his time with the USHL team, the U.S. National Development Team program, the U18 squad, and his performance at the U18 championship was absolutely phenomenal. He was just, every single time he was on the ice, he was, always in there, always aggressive, great mindset. And even so, the first thing that he was very personal, very relatable. And the first thing that he did when, he came onto the stage, he just said, "Hey guys, how's it going?" He was very open, very friendly. And to hear that, this is what you want in a prospect. He knows that the tension is going to be on him quite a bit with all these other names. Sorry, a little bit tongue tied there. But he was ready for it. He answered the media properly and respectfully, as all the other players did. He's just got the attitude and mindset that screams power forward, and he compared himself to Matthew Tkachuk with his ability to play that in-your-face style, maybe not much of a pest as Tkachuk, but he can mix it up a little bit. And Ryan Chesley just raved about his shot in his defensive game too. So hearing his story about how he moved to Detroit, moved to Toronto because his dad is Canadian, having that familiarity. He said the interview with Toronto went really well. And I even threw in the question in there, what would it like to be, play with Austin Matthews possibly in the future? And he's just like, anybody would be amped to play with a player like him. So yeah, I mean, great interview, great player. And, just very, very personal, very open. And, he had a smile on his face. So that's always a good sign as well.
Yeah, hockey players have a tendency to kind of be robots from time to time when you're interviewing them. So obviously, to some people, McGroarty, saying hi to you guys at the start of the interview may not have been that big a deal, but considering some players and how hard it is to get answers out of them, I think that's a redeeming quality for sure. And I read a separate scouting report on Rutger McGroarty, and I think somebody compared him to a Zach Hyman type of player, but with a little more offense. Now, obviously, with the Leafs drafting Matthew Knies last year in the second round, I think a lot of people now are saying that he's a talent that could have gone in the first round with how great his freshman season went at the University of Minnesota. So Rutger McGroarty being a guy who, if I'm not mistaken, he's a right-handed shot. He plays on the right side and center. To add a guy who has that sort of play style, Peter, I was just wondering, is this a guy that you think for a GM like Kyle Dubas, especially, who's been known to trade down in the draft before, do you think that McGroarty is the type of player that the Leafs would want to trade up for?
It all depends on if they think he's going to be available later on. And I think that was the same situation where, they traded down in 2015, where the player that they wanted, Travis Dermott, was still available, and they traded down to get 2 second-round picks to draft Dermott and Jeremy Bracco in that draft. I think if he's available, I maybe because they don't have a second round pick, maybe try and trade down a spot or two. If he isn't there, maybe try to risk that. But at the same time, a player like him with his shot and caliber, and you mentioned, a more offensive Zach Hyman. I mean, that's exactly what we said about Matthew Knies, but Matthew Knies appears to be even better than just a slightly better offensive Zach Hyman. So with McGroarty's shot and his ability to, play the body, be a decent playmaker as well. I think that's underrated for him. And I think the knock on him that maybe scouts may not like is maybe his skating isn't as great. The stride is a little bit, choppy, but he did say he was working with Barb Underhill and to improve his skating. And he said that she sees a lot of promise and potential in him to improve in that regard. So the fact that he was able to already have the hands, the physicality, the mindset, the shot, and the offensive game itself, you could always work on skating. That is always something that develops later on because he's a bigger player. And I don't think that's going to hinder him too much, because even when he doesn't have the great speed, his stride is able to separate him from defenders. So I think that he's a competitive guy. He has the smarts. He has, the offensive awareness. I think that he is a player that the Maple Leafs could try and target right now. I didn't have him initially, but I'm, kind of recency bias. Now that the fact that he grew up a Maple Leafs fan and they talked to him maybe shows some light that maybe there's a hint that he could be a possibility. And you talked about Knies as well. He probably could have been a first rounder. He kind of plays that similar same play style, and have another, 6 foot, 200 pound forward that's, somewhat mobile with the offensive game and smarts. I think that still goes up their alley.
Yeah, and I got to say, I was more surprised than anything seeing that Rutger McGroarty, of all players, was a Leafs fan, because like you said, he's from Nebraska. And typically the guys that you'd expect to be Leafs fans are the ones who grew up in Toronto. So, for that guy, for a guy born in Nebraska to already have the passion like that, I think the Leafs should be doing whatever they can to draft him. And I know our producer, Matthew Zader, who also covers prospects here at the Hockey Writers, has McGroarty in his top 15. Matthew, with all due respect, I hope you're wrong, because the Leafs pick at 25th, and he is a guy that I would most certainly want. Okay, so moving on, Peter.
I just want to add to that, I have him a little bit higher than normal, and you picked him 23rd for the Ducks in our mock draft, Alex. So I think he should be a little bit higher than where he typically is right now. But again, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a guy like him, we've seen players that are not even ranked in the first round go in the top 10. See Tyler Boucher last year. So who really knows where McGroarty's going to go? The draft is an absolute crapshoot every year. So Peter, just before we close out the talk about the draft combine, do you want to maybe go over a couple of the other players that the Leafs interviewed and maybe give a little bit of insight on them?
Yeah, Philip Mazar, he also talked with the Leafs. I know Noah Ostlund, he didn't meet with two teams, which was the Dallas Stars and Washington Capitals. Bryce McConnell-Barker was also one of them. Kalle Adelius, I'm a big fan of Kalle Adelius ever since I saw him play at the Henley Gretzky Cup. But yeah, I think all those players also fit the mold of, the high skill and high-end skill, IQ, quick. Yeah, Ostlund and Philip Mazar are undersized in terms of height, but they play a very competitive game and they're very in your face. They never give up. And the way that Awesome played at the U18s, I think surely took a couple of teams not by surprise, but on their radars because he's still ranked fairly low. I believe he's like 18th or 19th among European skaters. So to have that kind of, player that could play with that kind of pace and a quick level, I think that it goes well with the Maple Leafs if they're in that range to try and select him. And I believe Azelius said that Noah Ostlund was probably out of the four of them is probably the best player because of his smarts and his speed and IQ. So, good on that when another one of his teammates is saying that he's the real deal at this point.
And just for anybody who hears, the terms 5'11" or 5'10" or undersized, and they're immediately thinking, oh, there goes Dubas drafting another small player. Nazem Kadri clocked in at 167 pounds when he was drafted in 2009. And now you won't find a single Leafs fan across the globe that doesn't want Kadri back in a Leafs uniform. So players can grow. And if you're judging players and prospects by their size at this stage of their career, you're doing it wrong. So just wanted to get that out of the way. One final note about the draft combine, Peter. Are there any players that you would say impressed you more than others, or any players that kind of surprised you that maybe you got some information you weren't expecting to?
Not necessarily surprised, but during the testing, I came up with a list of players that stood out. Obviously, Marco Kasper, Owen Beck, Julian Lutz, Logan Cooley, Christian Kyrou, Cutter Gauthier, and Kalle Adelius. I going through most of the categories on the results of the testing, a combination of those three, at least three of those players were always in the top 25. Sometimes it was all a good chunk of them, 5, 6, but majority of them, there was at least three of those players in each of the categories. So the fact that they're very, very in top physical condition, especially with the agility, acceleration, the strength, I think that stands out quite a bit. Obviously, one surprise is still Christian Kyrou because he was a player that nobody had to be on the radar at the beginning of the season, just on a torrid pace, and to see the strength in his side end that matches up with the offensive game that he has kind of puts to picture or pen to paper that maybe he is worthy of being a second round prospect. Obviously, decision making is still a factor given the fact that he is a mobile defenseman, very offensively talented, good shot, and, an excellent playmaker. I think that if he's able to round that game out just a little bit, I think he's going to be a very promising defender. And whoever takes him in that second round, I think they won't be disappointed with that.
You know what? I think the one cool part about this draft, and it kind of crossed my mind when you mentioned Marco Kasper, is that there are a lot of players from I won't say non-hockey nations, because they're obviously hockey nations or else they wouldn't be drafted, but there are a lot of prospects from countries that never really had a lot of presence in recent years. And I'm thinking primarily of Austria and Slovakia. I mean, you look at the top 10 and you've got Juraj Slavkovsky and Simon Nemec, both in the top 10. You've got guys like Adam Sikora and, like you said, Philip Mesar as well. There are a lot of prospects from Slovakia coming out, and then 2 Austrian prospects as well with Kasper and Vincenz Rohr. It's very encouraging to see all the diversity between the countries in this year's draft class, and hope to see those 2 countries on the rise because hockey's definitely more exciting when they're up there.
Rohr was another one that stood out during the testing as well. He looked great in some categories.
He's a guy that I would definitely like the Leafs to take an extended look at if he's available at by the time their third round pick rolls around. So we've reached the midway point of the show. And once again, this week's show is being brought to you by The Morning Skates, a daily newsletter delivered to your inbox Monday to Friday, jam-packed with the best hockey stuff on the planet. It's a daily dose of the latest NHL news, rumors, history, funnies, quizzes, et cetera, all your favorite stuff. Just a little hockey fun and information brought to you every day of the week from the hockey writers. You will see a link in the show description below. So straying away from draft combine talk a little bit, I want to bring to your attention a couple of things that Elliotte Friedman said in his recent 32 Thoughts piece. So obviously, the number one name everybody's talking about this offseason is Jack Campbell. Last year, it was Zach Hyman. This year, it's Jack Campbell. And there was an initial report from a radio hit that Chris Johnson, who's with TSN as an insider, did on TSN 1050 from a couple of weeks ago, saying that he believes that Campbell is going to ask for something in the range of $5 million. And then Elliotte Friedman, in his latest 32 Thoughts piece, said that he doesn't believe that the Leafs and Campbell have had any extended contract talks since the season ended. So I wrote an article that is out right now. I think it actually just came out 15 minutes ago, or I guess depending on when this goes up, maybe 4 hours ago or something like that. But either way, I have an article that's out today where I predicted what would happen with the Leafs 4 primary unrestricted free agents. So Campbell, Ilya Mikheyev, Ilya Lyubushkin, and Colin Blackwell. So Jack Campbell, again, one of the most polarizing names this offseason. Peter, I want to know, upon hearing what Friedman said and what CJ said a couple of weeks ago, has your opinion on where Jack Campbell goes or what he ends up doing with his contract changed at all? Do you think that there's a better chance, there's a worse chance that he stays upon hearing those things, or what are your thoughts on Campbell right now?
It's tough. It really is tough, because aside from the 2 months that he had that screamed all-star goaltender, and that was probably going to be the nail in the coffin that Jack Campbell's probably going to get northward of at least $6 million. I'd be hesitant to try and give him around $4 million. Again, I've talked about comparisons for Jack Campbell. I think maybe a Darcy Kemper type contract, 4.5 mil as a cap hit, would probably be reasonable, considering that, yeah, you had a good performance. You did struggle at times, had an injury, you came back and you were solid for us down the stretch, but we're still not that convinced. We want to see you prove yourself a little bit more to try and be not necessarily, a little bit more consistent, because there were times, especially in January and February, where he did struggle before he got that injury. I think maybe if you go a little bit further, maybe 5.1, 5.2, but then again, you're going into Frederik Andersen territory where you had that for 5 years. He looked great for 3, and then he tails off after 2. And he's a little bit older right now, Jack Campbell, than Frederik Andersen was. So I think right now, I think you got to play it safe. And, if the Maple Leafs decide 4.5 or 5 million, that's the max we're going to go, and Jack Campbell says, no, I want more. I mean, I hate to see him go, because he's such a great guy and a great goaltender, but he deserves to get paid elsewhere if he feels he could get more. It's just, it's going back to the Zach Hyman thing again before, where you want to pay him that money, but you're a little bit skeptical based on history. And I think that if you do try to get him, I've always been adamant 4.5 is reasonable, especially in Jack's case, where he did have some ups and downs. Because if you go over that, then I think the Maple Leafs are going to be even in a more difficult situation. So if that doesn't work out, do you try and trade for a starter and give up a quality piece that you have in your system, like a prospect, like a pick? Or if it comes down to it, if you got to trade William Nylander for a starting goaltender, I mean, the talk is out there about Nylander. I know you want to keep the core intact, but he is, he can get you a good return. And if it means getting a starting goaltender, you have to consider it. I think you got to consider all options.
Yeah. My take on Campbell is kind of all over the place, because I even said this in the article today. Spoiler alert for those watching, Campbell was the only one of the Leafs UFAs that I actually predicted would stay with the Leafs. Yeah. And it's a really, I even said in the article that I've been racking my brain 24/7 trying to figure out what's going to happen with Campbell, and even though I say he's going to stay, I think that it's honestly a 50-50 chance what happens with him, because maybe I'm giving NHL GMs a little too much credit, but I just think that there are too many questions surrounding his durability and surrounding his consistency for teams to offer him a long-term deal at that price. I know that Campbell at this stage of his career, like you said, he's 31 years old right now, and he's probably looking to cash out. He just now played his first full 82 game season as a starter. And even then, he played just shy of 50 games. So he didn't take on a full starter's role, like a Freddie Anderson style workload this year. So I don't know. I don't know if there's another team out there that would see that. And, no matter how desperate for goaltending they are, be like, hey, we will give you 4 years at $5 million, because if Campbell next season, has a hot start, but then gets injured and then doesn't really come back to form after he comes back, then that's all of a sudden a contract that you're looking at could potentially be a boat anchor. So I guess where I'm at with Campbell is I think that the Leafs are going to do everything they can to bring him back, unless there is an option to trade for a guy like John Gibson or trade for a guy like Connor Hellebuck, because bottom line is I think the Leafs kind of learned their lesson from how they handled the situation with Peter Mrazek this year. I don't think the Leafs want to go into training camp with a couple of wild cards. So if the plan isn't to re-sign Jack Campbell, I don't think they're better off going for guys who, say, like an Anthony Stolarz type, who was a backup goalie this year with good numbers and hoping they can be your starting goalie. I think these playoffs especially have shown the importance of having a good starting goalie. I mean, unless you're Mike Smith in Edmonton, but we've seen Shesterkin stand on his head. We've seen Vasilevsky turn on when it matters most. I think that there's enough familiarity between the Leafs and Campbell where, and it sounds stupid to be talking about giving a 31-year-old goalie a bridge deal per se, but I think if the Leafs were to offer him something in that realm of $4 million, $4.5 million for a year or two, not only does that give the Leafs their guy for the next 2 years or one of them, but it also gives Campbell an opportunity to prove that he can handle a starter's workload over a full 82 games on multiple occasions. It's like he's not just a flash in the pan, and prove that he can work out those consistency issues. Yeah. And, Campbell said himself, he loves playing in Toronto. And I know that every free agent that ends up leaving says that. No one wants to say, oh, I don't want to be here anymore. So I'm obviously not putting too much stock into that. But at the same time, I don't know that any teams are offering him a long-term deal. And I don't know that he would leave for another team for a price that the Leafs would give him. Yeah. So I think as long as the Leafs are comfortable giving him that money, like $4 million in that realm, but keeping the term short, I think we could see a deal happen. It might not be until free agency opens, but I don't know. I'm just having a hard time imagining Campbell leaving for that kind of money.
Yeah. And just looking back, Anderson cashed out when he was 26, going on 27, when the Maple Leafs acquired him and signed him. Jack Campbell was 30. Obviously, he had a longer road to get into the NHL, but if you're willing to cash out at 30 right now, if you're the Maple Leafs, and again, cashing out a 26-year-old goaltender in his prime is way different than a 30-year-old goaltender trying to cash out right now. And as much as I love Jack Campbell, again, I think $4 million is more than reasonable. To go any higher, especially at his age right now, where, like you said, durability might be a concern. You got to take a cautious approach.
So moving on to our final topic for this show, also in Friedman's 32 Thoughts was talks about a Mr. Ondrej Kase. And I wrote an article a little bit ago about Ondrej Kase and about how the Leafs have a decision to make with him. So Kase is a little bit of a unique example, or a unique case rather this year, because he's a restricted free agent. He's not a UFA, he's an RFA, which means that if the Leafs let him go to another team, or rather, if another team tries to sign him and the Leafs choose not to match the offer from another team, then they would get a draft pick as compensation. And it was noted in the piece that Kase made a post on Instagram thanking Leafs fans for a great year or whatever. And I guess some people took that as, oh, he's on his way out. But according to Friedge, contract talks are underway with Kase. So there's now this question of, do the Leafs bring back Ondrej Kase, sign him for a year or two, and let him go to unrestricted free agency eventually? Or do they let another team try and sign him, choose not to match, and take the draft pick as compensation? Because I did the math, and if Kase signs, I believe it's in the realm of 1.3 million to 2.1 million, then, which is a raise. He made, I believe, 1.2 million last year. So that would be a raise. Then the Leafs would get a third round pick as compensation. And if he signs in the range of 2.1 million to 4.2 million, then they get a second round pick as compensation. And I can't imagine any teams are going to sign him for more than $4 million. So, now there's this question of, is it smarter for the Leafs to sign him and because they know what they have in him and bring him back and make him another piece of that depth? Or do they just let him go and take the draft pick because their draft capital is pretty thin? So Peter, I guess upon hearing this, what is your take on Ondrej Kase? What would you like to see the Leafs do surrounding him?
In a perfect world, I would like the second round pick, but I don't see even any team giving up $2 million for Ondrej Kase, even despite the injury history, even though he's going to be in a depth role. I just don't see it as, again, it may not be like a risk, but it kind of is, because it kind of like, if it's around that 2.5 range or whatever, I mean, it's not a lot, but I just can't see a team. I mean, if it's long-term, like even so, I can't even see long-term. Like if it's a short-term deal, like 2-3 years, fine, whatever. I think maybe I will take it, but I can't see the Maple Leafs go, or any team going more than 2, given the fact that he hasn't played a full season in his entire career. The most he's played was 66 games in 27-18, and he was on pace to do that this year until, the injury started to hit, the concussion happened again. And, obviously there's risk in that. I would think that if the Maple Leafs were able to sign him for two more years at the contract that he already had, I think it still works. I think when he is healthy, he's in the lineup, but I also think that if he's out, you have players that can replace Kase. And that's more important, because if he's gone for a significant amount of time, you have wingers, you have a Pontus Holmberg, you have Nick Robertson to try and come into the lineup and provide a spark and energy. If the injuries weren't a concern, I'd take a second round pick, but I can't even see a team giving up at least $2 million for that, given his situation and where he's at health wise.
Yeah. And you know what? I think the other thing too is, from a human standpoint, I found, at least, I don't know about you, but it did get kind of hard to watch Kase this year, because he suffered what was like his 5th or 6th concussion of his career this year. And, as writers about the team, you don't want to speculate on a player's health, and you don't want to say, you don't want to make decisions for him and say, oh, you should retire, it's not healthy, or, oh, you can keep playing, you're fine. It's difficult to watch. But that's really all it is. It's like, you don't want to speculate on it, but at the same time, seeing how many concussions he's already had in his career, and obviously, he'll be looking for work with another team. So I guess in that sense, it doesn't really matter, but it is tough to see how many concussions he's had, and the worry of him taking another one.
I would try and match that of David Kampf and his contract 1.5. I think both were great in the depth role. I mean, you have value there, but then again, I mean, I just can't see any more than that. You mentioned about the possibility of retirement. I mean, if he feels like he can still play, great, sign him. But then again, you run the risk of only seeing him for like about 50, 60 games. But at the same time, if he feels like this is the end, I got to look out for myself, then it's ultimately his decision on what he wants to do. And if he still wants to play, great. I'd still take Ondrej Kase on a heartbeat, despite the injuries, because we saw what he can do when he's healthy. He's an impact player, especially when he's in on the forecheck. And again, the chemistry that he has with Kampf is just absolutely phenomenal. They were, 2 peas in a pod. You couldn't separate them. They were inseparable. I mean, to get one more season out of that, or even if you try to extend David Kampf maybe just a little bit more at 1.92 for 2-3 seasons, and then Kase for another 2-3, you get some stability on that third line. So I think you got to worry about that, and the fact that him and Kampf again are best buds. I think he would like to stay here, no matter what the number is. I think maybe he would like to stay here.
Yeah, I mean, and I certainly wouldn't complain if he re-signed in Toronto, because, I always make a point to mention whenever I write about Kase is that, like, I think fans have a tendency to turn on players who get hurt often. We saw it with Joffrey Lupul back in the day. He was a great player when he was healthy, but the problem was he was only healthy 50% of the time, right? So fans kind of have they kind of have a tendency to turn on players who get hurt often. But I think after watching Ondrej Kase play, nobody can really fault him for getting hurt the way he does, because that guy he gives a harder effort than just about anybody on the team. He is in the middle of everything. He'll throw his body in front of the puck. He'll go head first into the corner. He'll go into the dirty areas, and he plays that style of game where it's like you can justify the injuries. Well, not justify, but you can understand why he's getting hurt so much. So, I mean, if they bring Kase back, then there's your third line right there. Assuming they tender Pierre Engvall, then you've got Engvall, Kampf, Kase on the third line. And that's, a third line that's worked for them this year and could continue to work. At Kampf had a career year this year. And Kase, I think, is also a guy who I think could be a valuable piece in the playoffs. And I know he didn't have a great playoffs this year, but you also got to consider that he was injured from mid-March right up until the end of the season, and he literally made his return for game 1. So
I think he was being a little bit extra cautious.
I think he was too extra cautious. Sorry, had to. But yeah, I think it's certainly a decision that's left up in the air. Like you said, I think the fact that David Kampf here at least could pull him back for one more year. I wouldn't complain if they brought him back, because The Leafs already have a lot of forwards who I think are going to be leaving in free agency, like Mikheyev and Blackwell. And there are some guys that obviously won't be back. Some guys could push for roster spots, but you also don't want to fill out your whole roster with players and prospects that have next to no NHL experience. So if there is a deal to be done there, I don't think anybody would complain. It'll be interesting to see how that one plays out. All right. Well, we have reached the end of the show. One final time, this show is brought to you by the Morning Skates, a daily newsletter delivered to your inbox Monday to Friday, jam-packed with the best hockey stuff on the planet. It's a daily dose of the latest NHL news, rumors, history, funnies, quizzes, etc., etc. Just a little hockey fun and information brought to you every day of the week from the hockey writers. Perfect way to start your day with your morning coffee. You will see a link to sign up in the show description below. That is it for another episode of the Maple Leafs Lounge. Once again, for Peter Baracchini, my name is Alex Hobson. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you once again next week.